This week in Parashat Beshalach, we read about a Malach, an angel, leading Bnei Israel out of Egypt, from slavery to freedom, me'avdut l'cherut. Reaching Yam Suf, the Sea of Reeds, the angel moved to a position behind them, and a pillar of cloud came between the encampment of Bnei Israel, the Israelites, and the encampment of Egypt. The cloud thickened the darkness and cast a spell on the night. In the words of the Torah, Vaya'er et halayla, it illuminated the light. V'lo karav ze el ze kol halayla. One could not come near the other. One could not approach the other all through the night. Now Rashi explains this last phrase, V'lo karav ze el ze kol halayla, to mean that the Egyptians and the Israelites couldn't come in contact with each other. But there's another commentator, the Kli Yakar, who suggests that when the Torah says V'lo karav ze el ze kol halayla, that this refers to the factions within the Israelite community. And the Kli Yakar refers to a famous midrash that describes how our ancestors were divided into 4 factions as they approached Yam Suf. One faction said, "Let us cast ourselves into the sea." A second group said, "Let's go back to Egypt." A third group said, "Let us wage war against the Egyptians." And the fourth faction said, "Let us cry out to God." To the first faction, those among Bnei Israel who wanted to jump into the sea, Moshe answered, "Stand and see the Geula, see the divine deliverance." To those who wanted to return to Egypt, Moshe said, "The Egyptians that you see today, you will never see them again." To the third group, those who wanted to do battle, Moshe said, "God will fight for you." And to those who wanted to cry out, Moshe said, "Keep silent." According to the Kli Yakar, the people in these 4 different groups could not agree with each other. They argued all night long. Oy! There they were, desperate slaves, almost to be former slaves, on the run, facing a crisis of life or death, and they could spend a whole night arguing. Sounds all too familiar. Moshe had to address each of these 4 factions separately. And according to the Midrash, he did a fine job of addressing each of the 4 groups' concerns. But what even Moshe couldn't cope with was the sarcasm that was expressed by some of the people when they said, and you can find this pasuk in Parashat Beshalach, book of Exodus, Shemot, chapter Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Aleph, 14:11. They say to him, these people say to Moshe, "Hamibli and Kvarim b'Mitzrayim? What? Weren't there enough graves in Egypt? You had to take us here to die in the wilderness, in the desert?" So even after addressing the 4 factions, Moshe still needed God's help. And when Moshe asked for that help, this is the answer that God gave him. Ma titzak elai, daber el b'nei Yisrael v'yisa'u. Why are you calling out to me? Tell the Israelites to go forward. So in the Midrash, known as the Mechilta, there's a comment on this biblical verse. And in it we read that Bnei Israel still hesitated until one man, Nachshon ben Aminadav, stepped into the water. And it was only after Nachshon took this courageous step, this courageous leap of faith, that the sea parted. One man's courage galvanized a squabbling mob into unity. The result was that Israel saw the power that God had wielded against the Egyptians. Vayaminu b'Hashem u'v'Moshe avdo. The people believed in God and in his servant Moses. Who believed? The people. All the people. Throughout Jewish history, there have been many, all too many, examples of divisiveness within the Jewish community. Just consider the many ways that Jews disagree about Israel. Oftentimes, we feel that one faction cannot come close to any other faction all night long. V'lo karav ze el ze kol halayla. Maybe we cannot hope for another Moshe in our generation, halavai, but could we ever use a Nachshon? Someone who could get his feet wet to lead the way. Someone who could galvanize the squabblers into some kind of unified vision. Someone who could bridge the gap, really a chasm, that divides secular from religious Jews in Israel. Break down the wall between the right wing and the left wing among Jews in America, in Israel, and around the world. Now that would be a miracle, wouldn't it? The great hope for all of us is that miracles still do happen. The state of Israel, the modern state, Medinat Yisrael, is by its very existence a modern miracle. And Israel will need another miracle for its survival. And I'm not just talking about the country Israel, I'm talking about the people Israel. What can we do to bring about the miracle? You might say or think very little, but every little bit helps. The first and most important contribution that we can make is to accept each other, whether we agree with each other or not. Ken Yehi Ratzon. Shabbat Shalom.